Good afternoon. I'm David Roderick, a junior majoring in biochemistry from Bronson, Michigan. It is my pleasure this afternoon to welcome you all on behalf of WeTalk to the first Free Speech Cafe, informal discussions about free speech rights and responsibilities. WeTalk is a university-wide initiative created to foster a campus culture of responsible and respectful civic, social, and political engagement. This movement, which is committed to the idea that free speech and social justice can be reconciled, has the support of our student and staff organizations, the administration, and the faculty senate. It is our hope to shape a vision of what we can achieve by working with others with diverse backgrounds, diverse interests, and diverse viewpoints. Hosting these informal opportunities for people to engage in discussions about the First Amendment and free speech is central to the WeTalk mission. Visit the WeTalk website to see the list of free speech topics that we will be exploring over this academic year. Today, we are focusing on free speech on campus. Jessica Swartz, WMU Deputy General Counsel, is the university expert on the First Amendment and free speech law. Jessica will now share with us a brief overview of the First Amendment. So is all speech protected by the First Amendment?
Thanks, David. So no, all speech is not protected by the First Amendment. There are certain things, certain types of speech that are protected. First of all, it needs to be something that whatever you're discussing needs to be a matter of public concern. So if I am standing in the corner talking about how great my dog is, even though he's a pretty great dog, nobody else cares about that. So that's not going to be entitled to free speech protection. However, if I'm standing on the corner talking about who I want to vote for Congress, that is a matter of public concern, so that would be entitled to free speech protection. There's a couple other things that speech needs to be in order to be entitled to this protection. First, you need to be speaking somewhere that is considered a public forum. So, for example, on campus, a classroom is not considered a public forum. That is a private place for learning and discussing. However, if you're out by the flagpoles, that is a public forum, so that, again, would be an indicator of the free speech protections. There's a couple types of speech that are not protected, and one of those is if you're making a direct threat at somebody. And there's a specific legal test about what that means, but it needs to be credible and imminent and those sorts of things. So that would not be protected. You can't go and directly threaten someone in their family and say, well, it was my free speech. You can't do anything against that. Another thing, and this is particular to college campuses and school campuses, is that the speech it cannot be, the quote is materially and substantially disruptive. This comes from case law from back in the 1960s. And what that means is, it's okay to have a little bit of disruption every once in a while because of speech and because, in the United States, we find this to be really important. But if that type of speech that you're doing, what you're saying, keeps others from being able to learn or effectively go through their workday significantly, then that's not going to be protected. One of the examples that I like to use is if there is a group that is out by the flagpoles up here on campus and playing a really loud music one day during a lunch break, and it's bothering some of the people over in Sangren, but then they go away and it's all over. Yeah, that was a disruption, but it's probably not material and substantial. Moving a little bit on down the spectrum, if they're there every day during the lunch break, that may or may not be materially and substantially disruptive. Going further down the spectrum from that is what if they're there at 2 o'clock during finals week and people are in Sangren trying to take exams? Now you're moving much closer to material and substantial disruption. Now, all of these things, they're very complicated, and there's multiple tests. And basically, it's all fact-based. So you're not going to, it's very hard just to say like a bright line rule. This is free speech, this isn't free speech. So each incident, the university and others need to really look into it and see how it's been going.
All right, thank you, Jessica. So my next question is, what actions can WMU take to limit speech on campus?
It's another good question. So first of all, we're going to look back at what we were saying about, is it the public or the private forum? If it's the private forum, again, WMU can exercise substantial control over that. On a public forum, not as much. But what we can do, so we can't go and tell somebody they have to stop saying what they're saying because we disagree with it, or because others on campus might disagree with it. What we can do, though, is we can put what are called time, place, and manner restrictions on it. So an example of this is from 2017, if you recall, when Richard Spencer wanted to go to Michigan State and speak on campus there. It was all over the news that Michigan State denied him his right to do that, but that's not exactly what happened. He had applied, many months before, saying, I want to come and speak at the student union. And Michigan State said, all right, come on, we can have you at the student union. This was February-ish of 2017. Then we had the Charlottesville happened, right? And he was very vocal about all of that. So Michigan State went to him and said, look, you can speak here, but we can't protect you and we can't protect the people who are coming to hear you and the others if you're at the student union. So we're going to move you to another location where we can protect you. So that would be considered a time, place, and manner change. Michigan State didn't say, you can't say what you're saying, but they said, you need to say it here so that we can protect you and we can protect the campus community. So that's one of the other things. What the university can do, if it wants to, is we can censure speech. So the university could make a statement saying, we are very much against this whatever it is, doesn't represent our values on campus. But what we can't do is make someone stop talking and stop saying what they're saying just because we disagree with it. So that's called the content-based. So we can't make decisions based on the content of the speech.
All right, thank you again, Jessica. So, piggybacking off of that, what actions to restrict speech on campus are prohibited?
Right, so those are very closely related, and it's the same type of thing. We can't, say, I don't like what you're saying, so you're not allowed to say it. Another question or a nuance that comes up a lot is, so for using the Richard Spencer example, we know that in the past, wherever he has gone, there's been some security concerns. Protesters, some have gotten violent, some haven't, and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a fine line of, are we allowed to consider what happened before when we're evaluating what we're going to do when he comes here? And legally, again, it's kind of it's the difference between, is this really likely going to happen? Is this an imminent threat? Or we've heard a little bit, we're not quite sure, maybe not. On the imminent threat part, and if we, working with our DPS partners, can say, no, it's very likely. These people have posted on social media saying they're all coming, they're bringing their guns, and they're ready to do something about it. Then we can step in and say, no, we got to make some changes here. But if it's just people talking and complaining and saying that kind of thing, then no, Western can't shut that down because of what they're saying.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is, are there any types of speech that are protected by the First Amendment but are limited here at WMU?
That's a hard question. If we were in the K-12 setting, I would say definitely. Students have less free speech, fewer free speech rights. The government has a greater interest in regulating the speech when you're in the K-12 environment. The college environment, as you can imagine, is very different. We don't have that parental oversight over students the way you do in K-12. There really haven't been many cases that are talking about that yet. It would be really interesting when and if they do, if somebody was to compare how the government can regulate speech in K-12 versus how they can regulate it on a college campus. So, in order to answer your question, not that I can think of, but it hasn't really been explored too much yet.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is one that a lot of people have been asking in recent times, and it's about hate speech and whether or not that is protected or not.
Right, that's one of the really hard ones. It's really hard for all of us to kind of grapple with, but the short answer is yes. Hate speech is protected. And in order to really understand why that is, you kind of have to go back to the beginning of all of this, the beginning of free speech in the United States and how we got there. And kind of remembering that the colonists were coming out of a regime with the king where they weren't allowed to say anything against the government. They weren't, and if they did, they could go to jail or worse. And so when they were drafting the Bill of Rights, that's what they had in their minds when they were considering free speech. And as we've gone forward, I mean, this has gone from, the court really started to get involved in free speech issues around the 40s or 50s. So prior to that, there wasn't much involvement specifically addressing this issue. In the 60s, with the civil rights movement, is where we started to see burning crosses and that sort of thing being argued that those are free speech. And it's gone up to the Supreme Court on more than one occasion. And the Supreme Court has said yes, it is protected, and here's why. When you're asking the government, the university, the government, whoever, to come in and make this stop, do you really want the government saying what is or is not protected speech, what you can or cannot say? For me personally, no, I don't want my government telling me what I can't say. And in fact, that is one of the amazing things that we have here in this country. We're the only country in the world that not only allows you to speak out against it, but actually promotes your ability to speak out against it, asks you to speak out against it. And if we were to start drawing lines on what speech you can or cannot use, where do you draw the line, right? I mean, and again, so do you want the government, maybe you're saying, and I keep messing with this, sorry if it messes with the sound, whatever it is you're saying, I may find offensive, but you and your friends don't, and you feel very strongly about that. So if me as the government come in and tell you to stop, well, then that gives you the right to tell me to stop. And that's really what it comes down to is, who has the right to draw those lines? And in this country, really, unless you are physically threatening somebody, the court has repeatedly said, we're not going to draw that line. You are protected. Now, and when I give this presentation to the first year experience students, underlying all of this is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that's something I know that we struggle a lot with on campus. Are there better ways to communicate? Are there better ways for each of us to understand what the other person is saying? But at the end of the day, yes, hate speech is protected. And, what I try to do when I hear the hateful things that are being said, it seems like more and more, but maybe we're just more aware of it because of social media. I try to really think to myself of probably what I'm saying, they are just as upset about. So I am going to fight for their right to say what they want to say so that my right to say what I want to say is also protected. And in our country, that debate and that discussion is what moves us forward. It's what is necessary for, we're a pluralistic society, meaning that all of these different viewpoints live and interact with each other. And those are the things that make us, the country that we are. So, yes, hate speech is protected. That doesn't mean that you should go and use hate speech.
Thank you. That was a really great answer about such a very controversial topic these days. So my next question is about how free speech will promote viewpoint diversity across campus.
Absolutely, and that it does. Free speech does, and what I say to the students when I'm giving my presentation is, look, take this opportunity that we have here, being on a college campus, being in this place where you are, they call higher education the marketplace of ideas. And kind of what does that mean? It means that this is where you get to buy and sell and exchange these different ideas and try them on and see what fits and what doesn't fit. And one of two things will happen as you're doing that is if you have a conversation with somebody with a different viewpoint from what you have, you will either solidify your own viewpoints more because you have heard the other side, and you'll have a reason for that beyond it's what my parents said, it's what my church said, it's what my teacher said, right? You'll have your own basis for that. Or your belief system will start to evolve, but you'll have an understanding for that other side and how they got there. We hear a lot about institutes of higher education being, these liberal bastions and brainwashing and that sort of thing. And, I haven't looked into that. I don't know about that. But the question I have in thinking about that is that really true, or are we teaching students to think for themselves? And when they come home and question what they have been taught through their whole lives, is that liberal brainwashing, or is it just questioning so that they can better understand where they're coming from and where they're going?
All right, thank you. So my next question is, how can we protect free speech while still having a welcoming campus?
Absolutely, and that's a hard one. I think that's one that schools are struggling with across the country. And I really thank Vice President Brenneman for starting this WeTalk program, because that's what this is all about, is learning how to have these conversations and discussions without them being arguments and fights. And it takes a higher level of intellect, I think, to be able to do that. We all want to retreat to our echo chambers. They know the science behind it now, that your body releases dopamine when people say things that you agree with, and adrenaline when people say things you don't agree with. And it feels a heck of a lot better to have that dopamine in your body. But as you start to challenge yourself, and Irshad Manji in her book, Don't Label Me, does a really, really good job of laying this out, of ways to teach your body to step back and really, so you're not reacting with the fight or flight, and look to the person. So I am interacting with you not as you being a white male, but as you being you. And what do you think of? And tell me about your life, and tell me what you believe and why. And then I take that and respond rather than react. Part of what we're doing here with WeTalk is trying to teach each other and ourselves, how to do that, how to have these tough conversations. And maybe as we're doing that, as we're exercising that and responding to each other as individuals, we'll see less of the hate speech that's going on around us and less of the cancel culture, because we'll understand where people are coming from. So there's not an easy answer to that, but that's why we're here, and that's what we're working for.
All right, thank you. I like how you brought up the Irshad Manji event from a previous WeTalk, and how it was all about forgetting about the labels, but being able to have those conversations anyways, whether or not you agree. So with that, that's all of my questions. If there's anyone in the audience who has anything they would like to ask. It's over there.
So Jessica, I know you work a lot with sharing free speech information with first-year experienced students. How aware are students coming into the university of their free speech rights and responsibilities? Does it appear culturally and through our educational systems that we are preparing people to be citizens of a democracy by that knowledge?
Oh, yeah, great question. So what she asked was, see if I can get all this. is, in my teaching with the first year experience program, does it seem that students understand their free speech rights when they get here? And are we, such that we are preparing them to be effective citizens in our democracy? And, I have a very limited, group that I'm working with. So I talk to about 100, 150 students a year. But in my experience, no, the answer is no. And some of the reason behind that, if you look at the research and is that as the country has moved so much towards our STEM education, which obviously is very, very important, there's only so many hours in the day. So the time that we and that, other generations spent on civics and social studies and government and history is not being taught to the same extent as it was then. So as students are coming in, they don't have the perspective to understand. I mean, it seems like the right answer. Yes, you should not be able to say those hateful things, so stop saying them. It seems like the right answer if you don't have that context. The other change is that this generation coming in now, we're the first ones really to go through with all of the anti-bullying language and education, and that, like, for us and for you and others, it was, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We know that's not true. Now we know that you can very much be hurt by words, but trying to balance the right of free speech versus the desire not to be bullied, two very important things, but also a little bit different. When I do my presentation, and there's hope, because when I do my presentation, I start out with a fact pattern about a professor who came to, had a Halloween party dressed in blackface. And she had a whole reasoning behind this. Her intent was not to be offensive. Obviously, it was offensive to quite a few people. And the university, there was talk about whether she should be removed for that. And at the beginning of the presentation, I asked people, do you think that her free speech rights would be violated if she was removed from that? And most of the class raises their hand. Pretty much everybody, unless they'd heard my presentation before, raises their hand and says, yes, she should be removed for that. An hour later, I ask them the same question. And I make sure to point out, I'm not asking if it was right or if it was ignorant or if it was offensive, because it was definitely ignorant and offensive and probably not right. I'm asking whether her free speech rights were violated. And pretty much everybody changes their mind, which shows you that over just an hour of education on this incredibly complex subject helps make a big difference. And that's why I think it's really important that we here at Western and through WeTalk and all of this are going out and letting folks know that there's a reason for this protection.
All right, thank you, Jessica, and thank you for that question. Over there.
Hi, so we see a lot in the news about particular faculty being removed or put on leave for something they've said or done. So my question, that's offended people, but my question is, if we're looking at free speech violation, how do some folks have the authority to remove jobs, but other institutions shy away from it and say that free speech has been violated? In other words, what makes these particular instances that seem similar, the actions seem so distinct, and where can we find consistency?
Right. So the question was, we see on the news and in other places certain faculty who are removed for expressing a certain point of view, and some faculty are not removed for expressing a point of view, and where's the consistency and why? Is that Dr. Perryman Clark? So first of all, the easy answer is free speech only applies to public entities. So where the government is coming in and taking action. So state schools, public schools, that's where your free speech protections are. So so the private schools' free speech doesn't apply to them in the same way. So that cuts off, like at the top, you can move them over, a significant number over into this category. From there, I mean, it really, and I don't want to seem like I'm talking to any specific situation. They're very fact specific. You get into the question of, are they speaking as an individual in their personal capacity, or are they speaking as an employee representing what the university is, representing the university? In the personal capacity, the school has a lot less control over that. If they're representing the university as an employee, your free speech rights are similar to the kids in K-12. The school has much greater interest in the free speech rights. The other thing, kind of like what I was saying before, is an institution can give a statement of values. And there are ways to say, well, it's not a free speech issue, but we do have a policy on this, and therefore you're going to be disciplined according to the policy. It's hard to speak generally on that because it is a very complex and detailed question. That's what I would give as a first kind of 50,000-foot answer.
Thank you, Jessica. Let's go right here.
So following up on that theme, so there's almost a disparity on free speech then between maybe the Ivy League private universities and the public universities. What challenges do you think that presents as an attorney that's looking at free speech through a legal lens, and how does that impact the future of free speech in higher education and Viewpoint University?
Yeah, so the question is, so looking at the public universities versus the private universities, and there's a disparity. There seems to be a disparity there. And as a lawyer, how does that kind of affect my viewpoint and as a scholar of free speech? The law is fairly clear on that, right? The Bill of Rights, the whole purpose of it, again, going back, was the government is not allowed to tell you in most instances what you can or cannot say, okay? Military people, totally different. Like, you have pretty much signed over your rights by joining in joining the military. So legally, it's a pretty fairly cut and dry thing. But in terms of access for underrepresented communities and that sort of thing, it is a very tough question. And it kind of, there are some, so a lot of the schools will have a free speech code sort of thing. So when you're in a private, although you don't have the constitutional protections, you could have a contractual protection. So there's an argument saying, I made a contract with you, private school. This is what your code says. This is what, and now you are breaking that contract by taking these actions. So sometimes people will do it that way. Again, it comes down to kind of a value statement. What value statement does Harvard want to make versus the value statement that Bob Jones University wants to make? They're very different statements. And that's just something that those schools need to evaluate, think about where are they going to place their value. Is it going to be like I believe Western has on encouraging viewpoint diversity, being a public school, but encouraging viewpoint diversity and people to speak out and understand each other? Or is their value teaching their doctrine? And higher education started out as places to learn church doctrine. And, some schools have stayed that way, some schools haven't. So that's, kind of how that comes together.
Thank you, Jessica. Let's go over there.
Hi, Jessica. I have I think kind of a two-pronged question. One is the rights of a person versus the public good. And then where does speech and behavior kind of play in a dynamic? And now bring COVID and vaccine mandates as an issue front and center. And then what about individuals or groups of individuals who have been marginalized by a system, let's say in health, where there's some suspect and mistrust of the health system. And I know that's a lot, but it's around COVID
Right.
and COVID mandates.
I'm going to test my short-term memory here. Okay. So the question was, let me see if we're looking at COVID and how the public interest versus the private good interacts when we're talking about free speech specifically focused on COVID. Personal versus public interest. And then also how systemic racism, sexism, all of the isms have affected healthcare and how that intersects with free speech. Did I get it? Okay. So, and this kind of relates to one of the first questions that you asked is, what is free speech and that. So while we have free speech rights here in the United States, they're not absolute. It's a balancing test, and it's been very clear. So we're balancing the government's interests in public safety, in an orderly and civilized society, and the individual interest in stating their personal beliefs. And in normal times, outside of a pandemic, when there's millions of people dying and all of that, most of the time, the private interest outweighs the government interest. And the courts have put a very, it's called the strict scrutiny test, a very strict test on how can the government's interest outweigh the individuals. And most of the time, under that test, the government won't win. During a public health crisis or a pandemic, the balance kind of shifts a little bit. And so in those situations, and I don't believe this has been litigated yet. So, just based on my familiarity with the topic, the government's interest in maintaining a safe and healthy and orderly society starts to outweigh the individual's interests on speech and relatedly religion and that sort of thing. Now, again, it's not an absolute either way, but they will start to consider those factors when the public interest outweighs, the government's interest outweighs the privacy interest. And again, it's a balancing test, and there's factors, and there's, all of that kind of thing. In terms of, systemically keeping folks out of the healthcare system, it's not really a free speech thing. It's as you mentioned, it's systemic, and it's not something I'm really prepared to talk about today. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Thank you, Jessica. Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, in that case, unless you have anything else you would like to say?
No, just, stick, well, I guess yes, stick with us through WeTalk here as we're all learning this together. We're all getting through these times. I'm not going to say the unprecedented word because everybody says it, so it stops meaning anything. But we are learning together, and so we need to give each other a little bit of grace. And rather than assuming that when you say something you meant to offend me, maybe you just didn't choose your words the right way, and so let's have the conversation about that. And WeTalk is, I think, and WeTalk is helping all of us learn how to do that better.
Thank you. And that's what WeTalk is here for, so that way people, both students, staff, faculty, everyone has that chance to really learn more about how to have these talks and when you should say the right thing, or what the right thing to say is and when you should say it. So with that in mind, I would like to thank all of you for participating in WeTalk's first Free Speech Cafe, and a special thank you to you, Jessica, for helping us better understand the First Amendment and how it applies to speech here on campus. WeTalk appreciates everyone's time and commitment to these ideals. The next Free Speech Cafe is planned for November 16th at 12:30, and the topic of that one will be when and how government can restrict free speech. WeTalk will continue to be successful only with the involvement from all of you and welcomes you to be part of the movement. Visit the WeTalk website to connect and learn more at wmich.edu/wetalk. Thank you all.